All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk Live, our first event post-pandemic. Today we're having a conversation about critical race theory and getting the diverse perspective from liberal thought and conservative thought. So thanks for everybody in the audience that decided to come out tonight and the panelists here today. As it says here, critical race theory embraces a movement of left scholars, most of them scholars of color situated in law schools, whose work challenges the ways in which race and racial power are constructed and represented in American legal culture and more generally in American society as a whole. And there's some people that disagree and agree that those concepts and those ideas behind critical race theory be taught in schools. And as a norm for Shop Talk Live, any of our forums, we like to keep our speaking time down to 2 minutes, and we also like to maintain a high level of respect of people's opinion. We all think differently sometimes, and that's okay. After we get a little bit deep into the conversation, we'll open it up to the audience for some Q&A. So if everybody agrees with me, this is a teacher move. Give me a thumbs up. I see everybody's hands. Thank you. I missed one student, but we'll talk about that later. I'm going to kick it off with our first panelist, the Executive Director of Shop Talk Live, Theo Wilson, and we will introduce ourselves from left to right.
Yeah, Theo Wilson, Shop Talk Live, Executive Director, and really happy that we're having this conversation. Our mission is to reconstruct broken communities, starting with our own, with the avenue of face-to-face conversations. Normally do them in barbershops, but right now, due to the size of the audience demand, Cleo's was lucky enough, fortunate enough, should I say, generous enough to let us use their space. So just give Cleo's a round of applause, specifically Malik Robinson. That's who I am, and I'll pass it down.
My name is Leandre Goldston.
Are you on mute, brother?
That one might be easier if you.
Yep.
Because I think you have to hang that on your ear.
And there goes your voice.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Leandre Goldston. I'm a father of 9, political activist, former vice chairman of the Colorado Republican Party, conservative, and tonight, most importantly, I'm a black man and member of this community. I came to offer a different perspective than some might have, and thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Shaw-Ron. I'm a Denver Public Schools teacher. I just completed 27 years. I'm also a former principal, and I've worked at Colorado Christian University in their School of Education, preparing future teachers. I'm also a wife and stepmom, and I'm the current vice chairman of the Colorado Republican Party.
Dominique Christina, author, agitator, troublemaker. I'm neither to the left or to the right. I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat. I'm a Gemini. So that's what that is. And I'll pass the mic. Right.
2 times.
Right.
I'm Devon Wright. You can also pronounce my name Devin, and there's a third pronunciation if you're Jamaican. It's Devon. So I guess I'm multidimensional in that way. I teach at MSU Denver in the Africana Studies Department. It's an interdisciplinary program that focuses on the Black experience as centered in Africa and in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, here in the United States, abroad in Europe. And I'm the resident sociologist, PhD in sociology. I also have a bachelor's and a master's in history and a long experience teaching in public schools, mainly in Florida. I taught high school one academic year, and I'm surprised I survived that year. But most of my teaching has been, most of my teaching experience has been at the college level. So,
And I want to give a shout out to all the educators in the room. It is not an easy job, and we do a lot of work and don't get paid nearly enough money. We're also waiting on Mr. Diedrich Sims. He is the founder of the Sims Fayola Foundation. So when he comes, we'll definitely allow him a chance to speak. So like I said, this conversation is about critical race theory and its role in our country, especially in the hot topic right now is in education, but that it spans a lot of different places as well. So I'm going to start off with Theo and ask, what do you think and how do you view what critical race theory is?
I think that we have to figure out how we got here. And how we got here is a culture war. A culture war started because somebody was told that white people were being taught that they were inherently evil. And this person, whose name is Christopher Rufo, went on to Fox News on Tucker Carlson's show and used the term CRT as a catch-all for everything diversity, equity, and inclusion training related. And he admonished President Trump at the time to make sure that he, by executive order, removes all of this kind of training as a necessity, especially in government roles. And about 3 or 4 months later, Trump actually followed. And the issue was that diversity, equity, and inclusion training seeks to right the very wrongs that have made this country feel some kind of shame about where it began. And what I want to ask really quickly is just a few questions, because this is also about the 1619 Project and teaching a history of America that decenters whiteness specifically. And there are critical data points missing. So by show of hands, I just want to know who in school learned that the Louisiana Purchase is directly due to Haiti revolting, bankrupting France, and having to sell that land. Who learned that in school? We got one person, two people, right? Who learned that the Constitution was inspired by the Iroquois Federation of Nations, specifically the chief of that nation, talking directly to Benjamin Franklin in school? Who learned that? Right, one person. So who learned about the burning of Black Wall Street in school? Right, well, y'all, I know where y'all went to school, though. Right. You're from, right. So who learned that, like, for example, that there are black towns that were wiped off the face of the earth because not only were they burned, white neighbors put lakes on top of them? Who learned that in school? In school. Right. So this is not taught. And if we're going to have some understanding of where we're going as a country, we need to understand where we're coming from. The need for at least a historical narrative that decenters whiteness, thank you, and actually talks about our history is evident in this room. And that's why I think that at least the discussion of critical race theory is necessary.
Thank you, Theo. DeAndre?
Do I believe that discussing critical race theory is necessary? Yes, I do. But what is it, and at what level? What level is appropriate? My concern is that we do not want to indoctrinate children one way or the other. Education in its base root, in its Latin form, the word educare, doesn't mean to inculcate or what you put in. It actually means to draw out. Our educational system should be drawing out those God-given talents that the children have and exacerbating those positive things. I do agree with Theo. To say that there are lapses or holes in our history is not enough. That's true. There should be a compendium. We don't need a separate history, though. We need one history. We don't need black history. We don't need white history. We need the history, the truth. And that's how we can make those changes. There have been many dark days in America, in this country, but the bright days have been there as well. And what also is not taught is the hand that we have played in the brightness of America. Everybody drove here or walked here and you passed a stoplight. But did you think about Lewis Latimer when you passed it? We need to focus on teaching our children the example of our great heroes, of those people who survived, who overcame, who came through. I think that is the best way to go about it. Critical race theory, from my understanding, my limited understanding, is for college. It's law school. I find it difficult to want to synthesize that complexity of data and have grade school children whose brains are not yet fully formed absorb it and apply it properly. I think that is a mistake, and I think that is asking for error later on. That's my perspective.
Okay. Priscilla?
I'm going to put my teacher hat on and just go back a little bit further. Well, first I want to say what I'm personally seeing are there's many different definitions of what CRT is, depending on who you talk to. So it'd be really important for us to ground a common definition of what we're talking about with CRT. But before CRT, first there was critical theory, and that started in Eastern Europe, in Germany, by German scholars. And then that was also influenced by Karl Marx, and some of his theories. Then it evolved into critical legal studies. And then that evolved into what we have today, or a break-off, I guess you could say, by several attorneys in the 1970s and 1980s that brought us critical race theory. So that's just a very short synopsis when we talk about critical race theory. Critical race theory, as Leandre said, started in law schools with lawyers in graduate schools to study systemic racism in America. We don't deny it. We don't deny systemic racism in America. We start with slavery, Jim Crow laws, redlining, segregation, blacks couldn't marry whites. I mean, there's like a host of them. And as a public educator, I could see systemic racist policies. You could just look at the Crown Act when little black girls were sent home because their hair was too poofy, or black boys had to go home and change their hairstyles because they had dreadlocks. So we're constantly looking at laws that are racist, and I think that's very effective and very necessary in society to address those. What I have seen as a teacher in Denver Public Schools, and what I have seen in different schools across America from different parents, is very troublesome, because when you get to the point where you create winners and losers, oppressors and oppressed, victims and victors, when I hear words like all white people are demons, or all white people are racist, or racism is in all white people's DNA, that is a theory, it is not truth. And as a black woman who was raised by a black father in America, who grew up during segregation, there was a certain way that I was raised, there was a certain way that my black father raised me, and how he spoke to me to empower me. And I think it's very, very important that when we have young minds in front of us, that we instill hope and value, that we teach them how to value other people and how to look at people with dignity. We can, I don't know if we're gonna get into talking about the term colorblind, because I grew up during a time where you don't say the word colorblind until I did my homework and I learned where that term came from. It came from the 1960s. Martin Luther King Jr., I want to be judged by the content of my character, not by the color of my skin. And that's where we get our anti-discrimination laws. So there are some elements of CRT that are in contradiction to the 14th Amendment. And so we just really need to continue to have this conversation about, if we're going to teach history, yes, we want to teach all of it. And we want to teach the truth to our children. But we also want to make sure that we're not doing it in a way where we create, like I said, winners and losers, where people feel bad, where people feel defeated and children feel defeated, like there's no hope for them. So that's a synopsis of where I'm coming from.
And then we just have Dedrick Sims, and he's going to take a second to introduce himself and also answer the question, what is critical race theory in your eyes?
Yeah, thanks. I want to apologize first for being late. I thought this was online. I got caught in traffic big time. But my name is Dedrick Sims, and I am the CEO of the Sims Failure Foundation, and the work we do is around empowering young men and boys of color to create a reality that's in line with their dreams. And so we have programming for that. And I think that being an educator, having been someone who has been a substitute teacher, a principal, I've been a part of starting 3 schools around the country and creating policy around education. CRT is something that's always on my mind in terms of making sure that we acknowledge the things that are part of our system, the policies, the practices, the historical practices. Those are things that have caused some of the education gap that we are trying to close for young men and boys of color. Also, the perception of who they are based on based on thoughts and ideas about people of color from a historical perspective. And so for me, CRT is not one individual's perspective or one individual's decision to do something that may be considered to be racist or racial, but I think it is a systematic or a systemic, ingrained, embedded ideology that came along with the founding of the country that still persists. I think if you look at a recent example, back in 2018 here in Colorado, we had language on the books, had amendment on the books to abolish language around slavery. People will say that, it was defeated in 2016. I think some people will say that it was convoluted because of the language, and people started thinking about, well, what does this mean for prisoners and prison labor? But when it came back up in 2018, it passed 65 to 35, and it had to only pass by 55. But there's still 35% of the people that either think that that's okay, that kind of thought or disposition or ideology okay, or they're still thinking, or they're still convoluted or using the language as an excuse. The truth is Colorado's not alone in that. We're not alone in fighting these ideologies or the dispositions about people of color, period. And us as black people, we're not the only ones that are subject to that. There are other people of color in this country who have been subject to the same kind of lived experiences that we have been subject to. And it's not always as overt as some individual action, but it's persistent in policy. And so that's what I think CRT is. And so I'm consistently been about creating solutions for the young men and boys of color that we serve, creating solutions for the teachers and youth professionals that have gone through our workshops around the country, and helping them to lean in, understand what the facts are objectively, and then make a conscious decision to do the right thing.
And just so you know, just a reminder, we like to keep our commentary to about 2 minutes, and so I'll just say time. I won't just cut you off or anything. I'll just slide it in there, so just wrap it up when you get there. So I'm not going to hold it against you right now, and then we're going to move on to Dominique, Christina.
That's what I get for being late.
And I'm still just trying to find language for what critical race theory is, in my opinion. My understanding is that critical race theory is more than 40 years old, that there were legal analysts and civil rights activists that were attempting to understand the relationship between racism as it was practiced in the Americas and its impact on public policy. They were looking, at least initially, at the criminal justice system, and then, of course, it spread to wider conversations around schools and our other institutions. That's my understanding.
That's awesome, actually, Dr. Priscilla and yourself. I think described it, a critical race theory, really, originated out of legal studies. And if we're going to have a discussion about critical race theory, I think, as some have pointed out, we need to sort of be honest about what it actually is. And I think the hysteria, as you're seeing play out in many local school districts, is problematic. The hysteria over what people imagine critical race theory to be is very problematic. Full disclosure about myself, in my research, I focus on conservative, right-wing, social movement organization, propaganda media. Specifically in my dissertation, I researched the entire propaganda media campaign of an old segregationist organization, the most powerful one in the post-World War II, post-Brown 1954 era, originally called the White Citizens Council, but shortly after they formed, they dropped the white part because they wanted to style themselves as anti-KKK, reasonable-minded white Southerners interested in preserving what they believe to be the true Southern way of life. So I studied their propaganda media campaign, and much of what I studied in their literature, in their broadcast television programming, a lot of it reminds me of, I'm a television news junkie. I watch cable news junkie. I watch a lot of Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and especially what's going on in Fox News reminds me a lot of what I studied in my dissertation, in the sense that in the post-1954 era, when the NAACP, its monumental victory, Brown versus the Board of Education, and the fallout after that, immediately what you had was an emergence of the so-called pro-segregationist massive resistance movement. I don't want to get too deep into that, but at the grassroots level, you had organizations like the Citizens Council, which the umbrella organization was the Citizens Council of America, and you had several branch organizations throughout the South, and they targeted civil rights organizations, civil rights activism, civil rights figures as, guess what, communist, as Marxist, as un-American, as practicing ideologies and habits that were not in line with what they imagined to be Americanism, patriotism, democracy.
With those ideas, like I would like to jump on that. It sounds like everybody up here sees the value in understanding, at the very least, what critical race theory is, and the nuance of it is just how do we educate our children, at what level and at what time do we educate them. But there's an organization called No Left Turn that is actively nationwide campaigning against critical race theory, the idea of it, but also, to what Devon was saying, attaching that to anti-mask wearing and anti-Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
So as we are all black folks with differing opinions, how do we combat against that? Seeing the value in teaching the truth to our children, which it sounds like everybody agrees with, how can we fight against No Left Turn? How do we mobilize together in order to provide the counter narrative to those issues?
Can I
I
also
think
ask
it
just
would be fair to start at that end of the table.
Yeah,
as
we
started
can
this
come
time.
back from Devon this way so you can finish your thoughts.
I actually just want to ask one question.
Yes.
In what K through 12 educational system anywhere in the United States is critical race theory being taught? I just want an answer to that.
Not a single place. But how many of us educators, to piggyback on that, have had conversations of race with especially with our black and brown students? And that happens on a regular basis, especially when injustices like...
And that's why I think it's important for us to start with a working definition of what
What it
when
is.
we say critical race theory versus what we're hearing parents are using. I call it CRT 2.0 because it's not true CRT. I call it CRT 2.0, and that's where we can get into what we're seeing. What you're calling hysteria from parents is very concerning, and even as a classroom teacher, what I'm seeing.
So going back to organizations like No Left Turn, how do we come together as people knowing the value in teaching our kids the truth? And there's value in teaching all kids the truth so that we're not repeating the same mistakes twice. So how do we come together as people to combat that narrative, and how do we mobilize together? Because it's been very difficult for people to do that and show up and force the way that they do. And I'm going to start with Devon.
No, you can go next. Well, I mean, just to wrap up my thought with this, I actually haven't heard the organization No Left Turn, but again, it does remind me of what I studied in my dissertation. There's a long history of civil rights activism, organizations, activists, black and white, multiracial coalitions, pushing against the status quo where systematic racism is concerned, and an anti-racist backlash movement, whether in the form of the Citizens Council or the No Left Turn movement, or an entire media platform such as Fox News dedicated to propagandizing the idea that Black Lives Matter is un-American, is Marxist, is communist, or is some orchestration of some foreign ideology that is un-American. How did this country form? Through protest, right?
Right.
And the American revolutionaries did not give the British flowers in demanding their freedom. They gave them bullets. It was a very militant movement. So if, complaints about, violent protest, and we could talk about that. Complaints about perhaps anarchy, tearing down the system, or something like, obstructing people's path to get to work. As what's happening in Florida, laws are being passed to criminalize protest. That's all American, right? What did the Boston Tea Party do, right? It was an economic protest movement. It was a social protest movement. There was mob violence. There was destruction of property. If you study history, that really does fit in line with the long history of American protest. We can criticize forms of protest, but violent protest and the concept of protest are not mutually exclusive concepts. One can protest and be unruly and embrace anarchy as the American revolutionaries did, and be violent as the American revolutionaries did.
I want to piggyback on what you said, brother. People don't know how old the trope Marxist, communist, socialist is when it comes to attacking black movements. We are in a cycle, and I predicted this last year after George Floyd's death caused so many organizations and corporations to take diversity training seriously. If history is the vast reservoir of patterns that I know that it is, we're going to see a white lash. I knew it. In fact, when this gentleman that I talked about before, Christopher, whose last name I forgot, he's been on Fox News, Christopher Rufo, this was during the George Floyd protest. The seed was planted during the time that we were trying to make progress. The point is, if we're going to stop organizations like No Left Turn, and I don't know that much about them, but I do know white lash when I see it. And what we have to do is honestly take a look at the history of anti-racist movements. The fact that they don't like Antifa by default puts you in the fascist lane, right? The fact that when I did my experiment going undercover in the alt-right, the fact that they mocked social justice warriors made them social injustice warriors, and they never saw the irony. So we have to start, number one, teaching the history of white lash. That is in the 1619 Project, by the way. That is in all of these historical narratives that decenter whiteness, so that we know what we're looking at when it arises again, and figure out the fact that these movements to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive are actually reversing the indoctrination. Because if you don't understand about lost cause history when it came from the Daughters of the American Confederacy and how they fought to make all American history books friendly to the South, then you don't know what you're looking at when we start talking about, no, the Civil War was actually about slavery. You see what I'm saying? You got to teach the real history. The fight for 1619 Project is to reverse the indoctrination of back then.
We're going to come back to Dominique, Christina. Thank you, Theo.
I always feel like I don't belong in these conversations. So what are you asking me? How do I stop an organization? I have no interest whatsoever.
It's not about stopping the organization. It's like, how do we come together as people? Like, we have, there's a coordinated effort. They are showing up on code, on message. So what code do we need to be following, and how do we come together and show up? Because we've had an issue with not being able to do that on a consistent level and tearing each other down from the inside. So how do we come together on code to combat, to provide the counter narrative to what is happening? Because they're putting people in school boards, they're showing up in races, they're doing a lot of things to purposely circumvent the education system and not teach our kids the truth.
So I was a classroom teacher for 10 years. What you just said is not a new phenomenon at all. Education has always had an agenda. So none of that disables me or disturbs my reality in any way. There's always going to be organizations that are trying to advance their vision and their mission. Sometimes I'm aligned with their vision and their mission because I benefit. Sometimes I'm not, because I don't, or because I feel disrespected by their vision, or I feel unseen by their vision. But I'm a person that is positioned on the planet in a very particular way. I do not have any more bandwidth to cajole, plead, seek the permission of, the acceptance of, or the resources of white folks. I mean that with all due respect. But that is not how I'm positioned in the world. So when there are questions, or when there's backlash, white lash, whatever, people reacting to things that are happening societally, I am always trying to first get an aerial view to figure out why I'm feeling about it the way I'm feeling about it, why I'm having the reaction that I'm having. Is it an inheritance, or is it something I've actually taken the time to interrogate and consider? Because it might not belong to me. The way that you're fighting, a lot of these resistance movement, present day resistance movements, look identical to how my grandparents fought. And my grandfather was born in 1911. So I'm not a person that sees like a lot of this stuff is radical. It does not look radical to me at all. You are still asking people in power to pay attention to you, to care about what you care about, to validate your experience. You need somebody, a white teacher, to teach you some shit. I'm just baffled by the idea that we have not moved past the initial chagrin when white folks in power continue to be exactly who they are. We keep being surprised. If I put my children in a white school or an intensely homogenous environment, I shouldn't have the expectation that they're going to teach what I want them to teach. So I'm not sure how to answer some of these questions, but I'm trying. But I needed to be transparent about the fact that I struggle.
And
I'm struggling.
I'm gonna come
That's why
back
you're
to.
here.
I got some questions for you behind that. So I will come
Why
to
you're here.
Mr. Sims, and then we're gonna come to Priscilla.
Yeah, I think that my personal position is that I travel across this country and I do equity workshops and have these difficult conversations with people all across the country, backwoods Louisiana to upstate New York to Atlanta, Georgia, New Orleans, Detroit, and I get statements and I get language that could make me upset. And over the years, I've learned to manage my own emotions by being more secure in myself, by understanding who I am, where I come from, and what I want to do, acknowledging the oppositions, acknowledging the obstacles and the challenges, but finding a way to navigate it in a way that doesn't change who I am, that doesn't cause me to not love my blackness, those things, right? And those are the things that I teach our young men. And so I am no longer interested in getting caught up in the emotional piece of it. To me, it's about intellect. It's about objectivity. It's about, okay, I understand that this is what's happening, right? So how do I stay calm, navigate, manage my emotions, and to move around it? And when I'm in that space, I can be my most authentic self. I can use sound judgment, and I can create realities and policies and practices and procedures that are going to get me where I need to be, while at the same time fighting the largest systemic structure. But I also know that I have people like Theo and I have people around me who are fighting this in a very different way. We don't have to all fight it the same way. And so I play my role, I run my race, and we all meet where we're supposed to be. So that's how I manage my emotions about it. And anyone who I come in contact with, especially the 10,000 young men that we've served over the last 6 years, this is the disposition I give. This is the reality that I give, because what I do see is that mainstream America, mainstream white America, what we see on TV, they don't react too well to a lot of the violent ways that we come across, or the emotional ways. And so whether I like that or not is regardless of the fact. What I want to do is eventually change policies, change systemic issues, and I can't do it, in my opinion, fighting them at the table, physically fighting them.
Thank you, Dedrick. Is it Dedrick or Dedrick?
Dedrick.
Dedrick. Thank you, Dedrick.
As you can see, black people are not a monolith. And we're all here for one purpose, and that's to unite, because there's been enough division in our community, in our history. Because I'm an academic as well, I like to unpack things. And I want to go back to critical theory that started in Germany, and it was connected to Karl Marx and Marxism. And he wrote the Communist Manifesto. And it was about the division between the capitalists and the working class. And the goal was, if you destroy the rich and everybody has the same, then that's going to solve all of our problems. That is what communism is, and that's what Marxism is. There are some parallels between what we see in critical theory and Marxism and communism and what we see in critical race theory, but except the divide is racial. And I think what we talk a lot about is when we constantly have this racial divide, we will never be united. I'm hearing a lot of stuff about Fox News, about this organization called No Left Turn, words like rhetoric. We're being called communists, we're being called Marxists, but that's actually what it is. We're going to talk about history. You can do your research. You don't have to believe me. You can do, in fact, I tell my students this all the time, do your own research. Don't take my word for it, okay? So I've had personal contact, or an experience, I should say, with BLM and the Denver Communists. I was at the Conservative Western Summit. Local news denied that they were there. I was at the corner at a stoplight, and they had BLM masks on, all black, communists. This woman came to my window. She looked at me and she prejudged me. She saw I was brown skin and thought I was a friendly, and I was like, you know, someone she wanted to talk to, and she handed me through my car window a flyer that talked about Marxism and destroying everything. And on the bottom was Denver Communists. If you want to know more, join our Zoom. We have weekly Zooms. This stuff is real.
Correct.
It's not rhetoric. And so I can go even into more detail as a classroom teacher of what is being taught and how our children are being taught to be quote unquote anti-racist.
And Leandre, go right ahead.
Well, Mr. Moderator, it's quite a bit to unpack there. One, it was a question about how to basically come together on code and on point and stand up to various organizations. There are also questions about do you expect white teachers to teach your children? You send them to all white school. And we're talking about getting back to radical protests in the beginning. I will try to devote 25 or whatever, a lot of teachers here, whatever that math works out to, I'll try and get it done. No promises. To begin with, radical protests, absolutely. They were violent. They did. You had the Sons of Liberty, the whole Tea Party, intolerable acts. And then you also had the intervening of the law that we have the right to peaceably assemble, to redress grievances. Okay, so we had a change. Two governments since that radical type of protesting. I'm a word guy, etymology is my hobby. Radical, Greek, radic, it means to the root. Everybody should be a radical constitutionalist. We should get back to the root because in those documents, in our laws, all this stuff that we're going through, there's an answer there, and we don't know it. We've been it's not just black history that hasn't been taught, it's proper history that hasn't been taught. We run around here and everybody in the world thinks that the First Amendment guarantees a separation between church and state, and that appears 0 times in the whole document. There's so many things that we don't know, that we need to know, that we can address. Do I expect white teachers to educate my children? You're damn right. Pardon my French. I do, because it's the truth. If I'm paying money in taxes or paying tuition directly, I expect the truth to be taught in that school, period. And how do we stop? How do we come together? What is our message? I do a side thing for messaging. What is our message? What is our message to the world? How do you stop a lie? You tell the truth. Veritas ad cor loquitur, it says in Latin. The truth speaks to the heart. We have not come together and said, this is who we are. This is what we want. We haven't done that. We haven't come. This is the first forum I've ever been involved in where liberals and conservatives could sit together and be respectful. I am flabbergasted. It's the first time it's ever happened.
Well, clap
and
for
I
that.
thank everybody. I really do.
That's Shop Talk Live, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we do. We have hard dialogue. Thank you.
But that's where it begins. All of us, we put our message together and say, no, you're not going to go any further. You're not going to categorize us as this, that, or the other. This is who we are. These are our rights, and we demand them.
I know, Theo, I know you skipped ahead, so I'm going to move on to something else really quick because I have a question. Is it dangerous? Do you think ideas can evolve over time? And is it dangerous to liken critical race theory as we see it today and aligning that with Marxism and communism? Does that kind of dilute some of the things that we're trying to fight for?
I would absolutely say yes. So let's look at this. My question is not whether it's Marxist, but is it accurate? Period. Was Marx's study of class warfare accurate? And in America, where class has been divided upon racial lines, I'm not surprised that there are coincidences. It's just what it is, right? We're in a situation right now in this country where we are in the midst of what I said before is the white lash. But what that looks like right now is that when people are talking about getting back to the Constitution, we got to ask, where did the Constitution, where did we as a people go wrong? And that actually was with capitalism. Marxists didn't put my ancestors on ships. Marxists did not eradicate the Native Americans. Marxists aren't causing climate change right now that's got the ice caps melting, the polar bears dying. That did not come from Marx. That came from the inheritors of the talisman of capitalism, get yours, money at all costs, including extracting it from the blood of black folks. So you talk about the 100 million that got killed under Marxism. That's like half the Native Americans that died, right? When we talk about what our allegiance is when it comes to the principles of the Constitution, it's a very fine-sounding document. But the very first page of the 1619 Project said that when these slave owners wrote these words, it was a lie. Our ancestors fought to make it true. And people who have criticized critical race theory says, how can you criticize the greatest country in the world? Through criticism is how it got great, right? The ancestors, right? And people are like, well, what's with Black Lives Matter? Listen, Black Lives Matter started after George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin. He was not a Marxist, right? Marxists didn't shoot Michael Brown. Marxists didn't kill Sandra Bland. That was a part of the apparatus that has been here since the slave quarters. That's a fact. So when we criticize that, we're trying to get America to live up to its greatness. And our biggest obstacle right now is not Marxism, it's not communism. It is the inheritor of capitalism, and now it's mutation corporatism. And if we don't keep focus on that, then we will lose America, but not to who you think.
Leandre, you can pick it up.
Okay. And that is true. You say that when our founders wrote the founding documents, the Constitution, it was a lie. Okay. I happen to believe that's why the Liberty Bell cracked. Upon the crown of the Liberty Bell is a biblical inscription. I believe it is Leviticus 25:10. It says, proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants. Well, clearly we were all the inhabitants and we didn't have liberty. That's why it didn't work. But the idea is that we can work. We've never entered into America as black people. For many years, centuries, we weren't allowed to. We just weren't. What I mean by that is exactly what we're talking about. We talk about racism that is ingrained in the society. There are things that people don't realize are racist. They really don't. You look at the history of policing. I had a PhD police chief explain this once. I was on a subcommittee. It says modern policing in this country comes from the night patrols and slavery. Well, think about that. So for 200 years, you were looking for these type of people at this time of night in these places around cities, right? Well, guess what? You found them. And you keep finding them today because what happens with training? Any business, any opportunity, any organization, when training works, we repeat it. So here it is, we're still looking for the same types of people, happen to be us and others. So yes, there is some racism in America. A lot of it is not known. It's unconscious. I don't believe that most people wake up in the morning and want to be racist. You take a group of 100 people, you're going to get 2 or 3 racists, just avowed. And then you're going to get another 40 or 50 people that don't realize that they subscribe to this by what they do. My point is that we have this opportunity. We need to, and I will, 10 seconds, what we need to do is look at how we choose leaders and from where. We choose the same people. We are as much a part of the problem as continuing this because we won't stop it. We won't say we're going to do something different.
Now,
Yes.
When I say time, that doesn't mean just stop cold turkey. You can wrap up your thoughts. I want you to make.
I want everybody else to have their time as well. I'm trying.
And that's fine. I'm giving you a little leeway there. Priscilla, did you want to speak?
Sure. I mean, we know race is a social construct. You know, if you look at anthropologists, there's no scientific definition. Scientists can't even agree how many races there are. So I just want to throw that out there because I know a lot of you know that. You can't look at us and attribute any kind of virtue, character, trait just by looking at us up here. We all have very different thoughts and very different lived experiences. I consider myself to be a Frederick Douglass Republican. If you know about Frederick Douglass, he wrote a lot about the Constitution. He's one of my heroes. He was born a slave at the age of 20. He freed himself, taught himself how to read, became the author of 4 autobiographies, and then became an advisor to 5 Republican U.S. presidents. At the time he died, does anybody know how much money he had in the bank at the time of his death? He had $300,000 in the bank at the time of his death, which is equivalent to about $11 million today. If Frederick Douglass was not a victim, I am not a victim. I don't live my life that way. That does not mean I'm a denier of history. It does not mean that I do not want to teach history. I'm very firm because when I hear people say, well, we need to teach all of history, from the very people who don't want to teach all of history. Because I'm very confident in who I am and what I do, and as a public school educator, how I raise children to be healthy, to love other people, to be respectful of other people. I'm not saying that's the only thing, and I mean, listen, those people who know me in DPS know that I was part of Dr. Bailey's research for the Black Excellence Resolution. I have my stories, but they don't define me. And I think it's really important that we don't start with telling kids, you're descendants of slaves. We're more than that. And we all know slavery is not unique to the United States. Come on. If we're going to talk about history, slavery is all over the world, and it's not just towards black people. In fact, black people enslaved black people. Black people helped put those other black people on those ships to come to America. So we have to be true to the conversation. And my descendants my ancestors were scientists, anthropologists, teachers, creators, inventors, teachers, tribal leaders. They're more than just slaves. So I believe that we don't necessarily need to start teaching history from slavery. I think we need to actually start it with Brown versus Board of Education and dissect that 100-page, ruling by the Supreme Court. We should start there.
All right, and Dedrick, you're up.
Yeah.
We can start to build on things.
I-
Matter of fact, we're going to move on. Like,
Good.
I really,
Let
if
him-
you
let
want to
him-
piggyback off of what Priscilla
Yeah,
said
so-
and
well,
everybody
not
else said,
Not
2
necessarily what
minutes.
Priscilla said. I mean, I am aware of the history of Frederick Douglass. I love the guy. But what I will say is that I think the question was asked earlier: can ideas evolve? Can people evolve? And I would say absolutely yes. I agree with Theo on that. As someone who, like I said, worked with educators and youth professionals across the country, people who are not always of color. I've seen evolution happen when you approach it in a very objective way. I had a lady who I never forget. I was in Abbeville, Louisiana, and I was doing an equity workshop. And this white lady came up to me after one of the sessions, in tears, and she said, "You are calling me a racist, and how do you think that I have white privilege when I live 2 streets down in a trailer?" And I'm struggling to make ends meet. And I told her, I said, "Look, I am so sorry about how you feel." I said, "But privilege has nothing to do with economy. It has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with how you are viewed and what kind of access you have in this country. And even in your financial situation that you think that's dire, you still have more privilege than me, someone who has a PhD and someone who's written books. Like, you get the benefit of the doubt prior to it when you show up." That's the truth that I tell our young men. I don't shrink from it, and I tell them not to shrink from it at all. But over time, I see those individuals who have that disposition change once presented with the facts in a logical way. It happened to me in Durango. I had the same kind of approach. I had a white girl from New York tell me, "Why are we having this conversation? Why can't we just all get along? I'm not here to hurt you. I have never done anything against you," right? And I had to have the conversation with her about, it's not about what you've done, it's about what has been done, and it's akin to. And I asked her, I said, "Have you ever been in a relationship with someone who offended you, and she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, when they try to come back to you immediately to have a conversation with you about making it all better, what do you often say?" "Well, I tell them, give me time, and we can't engage right now." I said, "That's what black folks are saying right now. You need to acknowledge the fact that something has happened, give us time, realize that our reality is our truth, accept our truth for what it is, and quit making excuses about it. If you want to listen, and then we'll go from there." So
Thank you.
I wanted to piggyback on that, or jump in on that.
Dominique, Christina.
I think I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut in, but I'm trying to fill the space. I think we got to talk about victims and victimizers. Slavery is not a victimless crime, neither is police brutality, neither is racism. The people sometimes that I watch on right-wing media do not like victim narratives. But the fact is that you don't like victim narratives because there's a victimizer. It's real. And the implicit charge in that is that black people, by talking about race, are keeping racism alive. I heard Thomas Sowell say that. My retort to Mr. Sowell and those who think that way is simply the 80s. Crack and Cosby, that's where I was born, right next to each other. Crack and Cosby right next to each other. What's relevant about that? Cosby, black people had just moved into the middle class, and a lot of them, away from other black people, wanted to live in the suburbs, did not want to talk about race. It was the hardest thing in the world to get black folks talking about race in the 80s and 90s, right? In fact, if you talked about some of that raw black power stuff, people looked at you crazy 20 years ago. Like, we're like, who you are, trying to be fake Huey P. Newton. Like, black people nobody wanted to get over racism more than black people. Why? Because racism hurt us the most. The next thing that happened was crack game, right? I grew up under the gang violence. I was a kid in the summer of '93 when it went down. Even in rap, you heard Tupac say, and they say it's the white man I should fear, but it's my own kind doing all the killing here. Gang violence in Cosby gave white folks a carte blanche out. What happened? I specifically chart the beginning of Black Lives Matter, not at the killing of Trayvon, but the killing of Amadou Diallo. 41 shots. 41 shots did something to black folks. Shortly thereafter, Sean Bell. Shortly thereafter, Tim Thomas. Shortly thereafter, Abner Louima gets sodomized by NYPD. Suddenly, when we were ready to tiptoe past race, 90s violence gave carte blanche to white America. This police violence thing gets back on our radar like nobody's business. And the judges and court systems that let us off, we are now examining systemic racism again. That cultural shift right there is why we have to talk about there are victims, there are victimizers, and we're talking about it to draw attention to it, saying that not, and I'm about to wrap it up with this metaphor, saying that we shouldn't talk about it is like if you don't test for AIDS, it'll go away. No. You got to have a litmus test out there somewhere so that we can figure out what's going on and how to handle it.
When you hear this to anybody that wants to answer this, because I heard this quote come from somebody that does not believe in critical race theory. Equal opportunity does not equal outcomes. How important, how does that show it? So how do we make sure that the outcomes improve for the disenfranchised?
You can start with the opportunities, but all right.
Did you want to speak to that?
I don't think this end of the table ever had a chance to answer the last two items.
I'm going to pass it to Dominique Christina and just pick up however you're feeling, because just knowing history of that, I see that those wheels turning in there.
I don't know what it is that we want. You're absolutely right. Black people are not a monolith. It's a great reminder for black people and white people and everybody else. I don't know what it is we're seeking. I could live my whole life. I could spend all my energy, all my intellectual capital being offended at white supremacy every day, and I'll die like that. I could just literally every day find some new shit to fight about. That would be a righteous life. I would be an activist. It would be noble. But at some point for me, I had to shift my consciousness away from the mental illness I inherited. I had to. That doesn't mean that I'm operating outside of its awareness, but I can't let it be, I can't let it overwhelm my possibilities. I can't let it mean the rest of my life, the bulk of my life. So I guess I'm still struggling, even in this conversation. I struggle with things like, I'm being incredibly transparent. I struggle with things like, in this context, I'm not a victim, you know what I'm saying? And big up for not being a victim. I'm not a victim either. But at the same time, and I just said this to my partner on the way here, whoever victimized you did make you a victim. You became a victim. You elected not to remain one. But you became one. So that story matters.
Both things are true.
Right. All of it matters. I don't have to, in order to be a more evolved person, disremember my history. I don't have to do that. I don't have to, in the interest of myself and in the amplification of how strong I am, I don't have to act like my stepfather didn't happen. He happened. I'm going to tell you he happened so you know who you're looking at. But he's not a focus. I won. That's the focus. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, and I would love to open it up to this room too, but I don't know how the format is. I think these conversations are very valid. I think they're legitimate. I also think, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, I also think black people in particular, indigenous folks, people of color, you have been historically and contemporarily marginalized. That's a fact. That's the data. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with that data. Some of us can't figure out how to crawl out of the grave. A whole lot of us did and do. Some of us, when we crawled out, though, we weren't very good people. Some of us, when we crawled out, we were philosophers and poets, right? I'm just saying that in this room to say all of it's relevant. There's so much nuance and complexity because that's what we are. We are nuanced and complex people. But I'm really interested in hearing what it is we want. If we say we're outraged because there's this group, right? And there's this pushback, and they're saying they don't want to teach critical race theory in school. Okay, if they draw a line in the sand and they say, I'm not teaching it, I don't care how offended you are, what do you want? And what will you do? Because I can't have my happiness be contingent upon what people in power do. I can't.
Thank you, Dominique. Christina. It's important for us to understand that a lot of that conversation is happening in the education arena. And our kids are the ones that are going to be the ones that can dismantle these systems and continue to dismantle those systems. And that's why it is extremely important that we have a dialogue. No matter where you stand on the aisle, left, right, in the middle, on top, underneath, or far away from it, we have to have a dialogue about what our kids are learning. And so that any system that is in place that holds anybody down and prevents them from, even though they had that opportunity, their outcomes were not guaranteed to them like some people's outcomes were. So how can we improve the circumstances for people? And I would like to open it up. You've heard and been able to form some idea about the ideas here. If you have a specific question for an individual, or if you have a question for the panel as a whole, please raise your hand. And these lights are very bright.
So we can't really
So
see
I
them.
think I see Ronnie, and if it looks like Hashim, but I can't tell. So Ronnie, Hashim, and Ms. Harris, did you have a question as well? We'll go that order. So Ronnie.
Just barely.
Is there a microphone? Yeah.
You like that joint.
Watch your step. Watch your step.
I just turned it off.
Okay, yeah. After she does.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, cool. But this camera's on.
I was gonna say a lot.
Hey, dude.
Is it on? I can't hear myself. So anyway, I was gonna say a lot of people have been talking about, one, they're not victims. They've been talking about beliefs and things of that nature. And my issue with people talking about, I believe or I think, is that you don't have the information about it to know and have the wisdom and knowledge about it. Because in order to know, you have to educate yourself about it. And the thing with our children is they're breaking these barriers. They're doing the radical work and having the discussions. But some of the first things we have to do is, it's an acronym that I was listening to a spiritual lecture, and the acronym is WIA. It's words, images, and actions. Yes, we have to have discussions and have to use words, but we also have to visualize and have the images of what we want, and then we can act. We can't act if we don't have those things in place. If we don't have that image in mind, or those images, we can't act upon anything. And we do, as Ms. Christina said, we do have to have, and we have to know what it is that we want. Because we can never move forward and unify if we don't know what it is that we want as a people. If we keep talking about and complaining about what's happening, there's a lot of stuff that's happening that ain't good. But let's talk about what we can do to make it better and to actually unify with each other, because we'll never move forward if we don't actually unify with one another.
That is very well said. Words, images, and actions. Getting back to words and what they actually mean, their ontological meanings, and the images. And this is where I come from when I talk about it's not just slavery. The images. Show our children the great legacy, and there is one, of survival, of the entrepreneurship, of invention, of innovation, of faith, all those great men and women, brothers and sisters in history that they too are left to the side. We get the same 3 or 4. You might get a Frederick Douglass, you might get a Dr. King, maybe a Harriet Tubman, but you don't know anything about Medgar Evers, right? You don't know anything about Dr. Vernon Johns. So there's words, there's images, but actions. We'll talk about unity. Economic destiny is destiny. Now, we've been redlined against, you're not going to loan money in this area and that, but where are our community banks? How can we come together? What's the net worth of black people in America? Not just Prince George's County or Fulton County, anything like that. What's the net worth of black people in America? How much do we spend on entertainment? How much do we spend on clothes? How much do we spend on all these things? And they're good. What if we took all that worth and we decided as a people that we're only going to shop at black-owned businesses? What if I'm a superstar athlete, instead of signing with Nike, I do my own shoe line and I put that money back into our community banks? I put that money back into college funds for our children. There is the action. The action is the unity itself. Every other community does this, supporting their own schools, supporting their own businesses. We do a terrible job at that. I think that's where we can start.
I would like to say so comparing the black community to other communities is a little difficult given the aggression that has been taken out when we actually try to lift ourselves by the bootstraps. And I think this has to be said. This is a slightly different thing. We can't compare ourselves to Latino, Asian, Jewish Americans. This is a little bit different here. First of all, we don't have a native land that claims us and can lend us lines of credit that are interpreted by our banking institutions that can help set up our businesses. It's a major thing. You cannot deport a black man anywhere. The next thing that's going on is that you have our disunity, I do agree with, but the source of that disunity is a trauma that is not being addressed. We got traumatized out of supporting one another. Every Black Wall Street that burned, every Dr. King that got shot, every Medgar Evers, every Huey, every Fred Hampton, right? In order to get on one accord, you need a leader. That is a fact. America's got a leader. His name's Joe Biden. And we have a system literally of succession just in case that leader falls. Repeated decapitation makes people figure out new ways, and sometimes we can't figure that way through that trauma, right? I want to say that words, images, actions. What we do want in this fight is for our history to be taught in its completion. That is an outcome, right? That is something that's tangible. And when 1619 Project, which was so thoroughly well written and earned a Pulitzer Prize, started getting suggestion that that would be the history, this is where we see the backlash. Why is it so important? Because we need also white allies to help us break down systemic racism. It hurts you too, okay? The next thing is that if we have barriers broken down, we might have access to some of these lines of credit that can actually help us build up our black community now that black folks understand, because we can teach the heroes and we can teach what they overcame simultaneously, right? I read 1776 Project. It really did focus on a lot of black heroes. 1619 focuses on what they had to overcome to become those heroes. It's not either or, it's both and, right? And the vision that we're trying to create for America is to reckon face to face with its past, which it refuses violently to do, so that we can have some new damn problems next generation. But if our kids aren't being taught the truth, they're going to continue to operate in these lies. And if we don't overcome that, our children will be fighting the same fights. That's what we're trying to stop from happening.
And I feel it, but I still come back to the fundamental question. So let me frame it another way. Somehow, despite critical race theory not being taught to you,
right?
Or me,
right?
Or my mother, who's got 2 PhDs,
or me for that.
Okay, or my grandparents, right? Somehow, we weren't calling it critical race theory, but somehow we were getting it and we were teaching it. Now, I'm just saying that to say, if you're looking for some formal acceptance, then you might be sad inside. Okay? You might not get it. However, we've been subversive. We've been doing that. The stuff we teach our kids, we've been supplementing and augmenting. That's what we do. We do that, or I do that, even if they're in a grade school. If I see a gap in the content, I fill it. If I can fill it, I fill it. So I guess I'm just saying that to say, again, we all have a right to feel whatever we feel about the pushback, but it's pushback. And if we're not used to anything else, we should be used to pushback and resistance and oppositional thinking. That's fine with me that it exists because it forces me to mean what I say I believe in. You know, I have to interrogate it some more before I step out and say I'm now defending my position. If a formal acceptance of critical race theory is not going to happen, how else can you make sure that students get it? You don't have to call it critical race theory, Theo. You know that.
It actually wasn't called critical race theory. It was actually a misnomer, an intentional misnomer. Like,
so you can teach this stuff. You can augment things without calling it critical race theory because that's all we do. We've been doing that. And on the subject of a concern that critical race theory is going to radicalize or leftize, whatever, students, okay, but every education you've ever received in one way or another had somebody's agenda attached to it. It was trying to position you to believe something. Mm-hmm. So this is no different.
Can I jump in?
There was a lot that I want to I just want to speak to my experience as an educator and use it as a confession moment. I want to incriminate myself as
Lead the fifth, brother. Come on.
As someone who doesn't mind hurting people's feelings.
That is my religion.
In fact, let me go beyond that. It's really for me not about not minding hurting your feelings. In fact, I think learning is inherently uncomfortable. Even that is a mild word. So let me go beyond that. I think learning about American history, right, the ugliness of it, probably will make you feel kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
Regardless of your racial identity. Probably, let me tell you, I started teaching college in January 2003, Broward College in South Florida. It was a 4-hour African-American history class. I was nervous as hell. Every night before the class, I did not sleep because I was over-preparing. When I got to the section on the Middle Passage, the transportation of African slaves across the Atlantic Ocean to become slaves, I showed a segment, the excerpt from Amistad, that scene. It's a very brutal scene. And Steven Spielberg was very great at portraying that. I had a number of students cry in the class. I remember one student, she got up and she left. And you know what? I felt like I was doing my job. Fast forward, 2005, same college, Broward College. The first time I taught, not African American history, but just regular, good old-fashioned American history, right? College level. After that semester was done, I found out about this new thing a former student told me. It's called Rate My Professor. So you should go on there, you should go check it out, see the commentary.
Great.
Very interesting. So if I remember, you all can look this up if you want. I remember, I'm Professor Wright, by the way. I remember some of the commentary was, if you're white and you want to be made to feel guilty about the raping and pillaging of Native Americans and the enslavement of black people, take his class. In fact, that's exactly what it says. If you want a fair and balanced presentation of American history, don't take his class. Then there was another comment that was similar to that. Reading that made me feel awesome. I'm just going to tell you, I felt like I was doing my job, right? I mean, if learning about the historical facts of American history makes you cry, makes you uncomfortable, that pales in comparison to how the slaves felt. Woo! That pales in comparison to mass incarceration. You should feel fucked up about American history. You should. That's really what I wanted to say. Oh, this?
There's one thing I want us to remember. Like, everybody on this panel is knowledgeable and able to protect their children from the systems that are in place. But unfortunately, that's not always the case for all of our students. So we have to remember the students that don't have that luxury of aware parents and family that are putting them in a position to understand the world around them. And those are the outcomes that I'm speaking about when we're talking about the kids, the forgotten, the ones that don't have that same, even though they have the opportunity to learn, those outcomes are stacked against them. So we have to remember, how can we support them? And I'm going to come back to this question over here, if you're still ready.
Hi, my name is Annalise Harris, and I actually have been an educator in DPS. I started my own nonprofit called Curls on the Block, and I just finished Camp Curly. And on our last day, we got a chance to watch the Black Doll test. Typically, with Curls on the Block, I start with embracing, exploring, then empowering each other. The embracing part starts with the history of black hair and the Black Doll test. They learn how the Black Doll test was conducted. They watched the video of the reenactment. You know, it was another test done much later. And they also learned how the results of the Black Doll test were used to help integrate schools. And so on this past Friday, I had girls between the ages of 6 and 15. Some of the high school age girls had seen the clips before. However, they hadn't had it with a black educator and a conversation in the room where everybody looked like them and could relate to them in Colorado. I'm mentioning that because, in particular, I'm looking at you. I appreciate your words. You know, none of you really opposed, right, critical race theory. So I'm grateful that we're not questioning if it's I mean, you can believe stuff's happening or not. It's going to happen, right? Do I believe we should rely on white educators to do it? No, absolutely not. However, they do have an obligation to uphold whatever expectations we are demanding. As a community, we do need to have some virtues that we should stand on collectively. So regardless of if we're a monolith or not, it should be inherent that you don't mess with the black community when it comes to certain things, like our hair. See, you mentioned the Crown Act in your critique. You literally listed, and my question is coming, but you referenced the young black girls being suspended or boys having to cut off their locks. And fortunately, we did pass it in March 2020, the Crown Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. But if those children are experiencing these travesties, why would we limit the conversation in the classroom about it? And again, I go back to your concern about, are they ready? Yes, they are. The young girls did cry. They did, and guess what I had prepared? I had volunteers, and this was for 38 young black girls. I had 6 facilitators who were between ages 15 to 19 themselves. I had elders in the room, and I had millennials like myself, ready to have these conversations. And when I say ready, no one's really ready, because a young 6-year-old said, I can't watch this anymore. And all she had watched was 4 black kids consistently pick black dolls as negative adjectives and have to watch a tally mark, because that's what the process is in Curls on the Block. We keep it real, and they have to process with us. They then separate in small groups, and you know what? That action, they had to come up with 10 ways that they could address whatever group they were connected to, so their age range, and inspire the next generation to believe that they were better. So my question is, how could you question if they're old enough to have these conversations, and what would you expect the conversation to look like if you're apprehensive to have those deeper conversations when 6-year-olds are crying because they know what it means when someone picks a doll as ugly, bad, or mean, and it looks like them?
Okay. Well, I feel compelled to answer that. Thank you for the question. What I'm talking about is the appropriateness of age and the level of the material. And Doc, I think you brought it up. You asked the question, where in K through 12 education is critical race theory in the form that we're discussing here tonight taught? And the answer was nowhere. That is a problem. That is part of the problem, is that what is the standardized curriculum, right? Who decides what's being taught and how we are being portrayed as people? That's part of my objection. We are not victims. We've been victimized. Yes, but we don't have to, and you pointed this out well, we don't have to remain that way. My concern with teaching that college level information down to grade levels is that there's no standardization. We don't know who's teaching it. We don't know how it's being inculcated into the children. Are they learning victimology? Are white kids learning that they're just ogres, preparing them in 20 years for the next Hitler to come up and say, nah, you're white, you're good. Everybody else is bad. Let's kill up everybody. That's my concern with asking about the age and the appropriateness. Certainly, we need to look at systemic racism. I mean, you'd have to be less than a fool to think that it doesn't exist. So,
Could I ask,
how
though,
we do that?
what curriculum are you familiar with being used in DPS right now?
I am not.
So how are we critiquing CRT and expecting things that we don't even know what's happening now? Because even in math, they're not teaching where math concepts actually generated from. They don't teach that. They teach the European version, which was adapted from what they learned from cowrie shells and other techniques that stem from African culture.
But
so
that's the
they
exact.
They don't teach one curriculum on that, right? Everyone
But
talks
that's
about
the
other
exact.
stuff, but they don't know what
That's
it
the
is.
exact issue. The exact issue.
So I
How are
feel
you
like you would
teaching-
have an argument if you could actually state, right now we're learning and using this curriculum, and here are the deficits. And that's why CRT for 6-year-olds should not be taught this way. But I really don't hear that. And so any critique
argument
about it
is-
is questionable.
My argument and critique comes from the fact that this came from law schools. Did it not? It did. There is no way that we are teaching law school level material to 6-year-olds, and they're
Well,
comprehending.
You know what? 6-year-olds do understand the law without being taught it, don't they?
But I think
They don't have to have a degree in law to understand that there are some consequences for certain levels of offenses, do they? In particular.
Just
No,
for
but they will
clarification,
miss the nuances.
this is not being taught in K
school,
through
it's
12.
not. It's
Right.
not
This is
being
not
taught
being
there.
taught in K through 12. It's not.
But there is confusion,
It's
and
not.
I'll shut up in a sec.
Yeah.
But No Left Turn is actually a website, and it actually lists a number of cases. And one case is floating a black woman who has had a senior-age son, he's in high school, in a sociology class. And this website, I hate to encourage going to it. However, it's important to understand what our opposition is pushing. They have code words connected to CRT.
Oh, yeah, that's
Abolitionist. Anti-racist training, anti-bias. Are those truly words that we believe are actually bad for our children to understand and work with?
If you're racist, you are.
If you're right.
That's what I would say.
But again, we're dealing with some puppeteering with our black community.
Annalise.
So
I'm
If-
sorry.
And so
it's a black woman's case that has been going through the court system that's being pushed right now. And I just forgot if it was Kansas or Arkansas. But
let's address.
You need a microphone. He needs a microphone.
While you're getting the mic to him, critical race theory is a misnomer for just diversity training. It was intentionally skewed by Christopher Rufo so that he could get some points with Tucker Carlson on Fox News last summer when the world was burning from watching George Floyd die. That's what happened, right? Critical race theory, the legal book,
I'm going to pass this around for anyone who wants
is
to see.
hella not getting taught to our kids. And there's people trying to make it seem like they're getting taught to our kids, but it's not getting taught to our kids. What they're really, right. But no. There is appropriateness for grade level. I understand his point on that, right? Comprehension is a thing that just goes up with age, but that don't mean that they don't need to be taught with like that. They don't need to be taught American history. They do need to be, and kids are old enough. They said if a black girl is old enough to experience racism, a white kid is old enough to learn about it, right? So I feel like that's the crux of your point. And yes, it's true. It's just that actual critical race theory stuff ain't getting taught in schools. When they messed up the words, it made people think it was.
So I think we can all agree that at some level it does need to be taught, whether it's, for example, our school, after the George Floyd, after January 6th, let me back up a little bit. After January 6th and they storming the Capitol, we actually stopped all our classes the next day and had dialogue about it. To me, that's just as important to have students dialogue about it. There might be any formal curriculums or anything, but it's important for teachers that look like me to be able to have conversations with people, and teachers that don't look like me to have that conversation appropriately and not victim blame and do some things like that. But I know we had a question up here. I didn't want to have a back and forth for too long because we have a few people that has something to say. Hashim, did you want to speak now?
All right. Good evening. My name is Hashim Coates, and I came in late from the wasn't here from the beginning, but I was on the side listening. And there's just some things that just are bothering to me because it's triggering me in how things that are anti-black work. So I want to talk about slavery because it was brought up, and people love to talk about how slavery existed before it existed here in America.
Go ahead, bro.
And yes, it did. However, if those of us who claim to be educators would actually lean on that claim and do some research and understand how in the 1300s and the 1400s, the process began to be different. With the discovering of Americas, there was actual work that took place to see who would make the best slave over here. Now, to reference that, I encourage everyone to pick up the book, Stamped from the Beginning.
It's a good book. It's a good book.
It's a thick book, so if you feel challenged, just do the first 50 pages, and I promise it will make you make a 180 from where you are if you fall back on the whole thing of slavery was something that black people did also, and all that type of stuff.
Can I say the subtitle? The definitive history of racist ideas is the subtitle for that book.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And so all that started with like, they went through testing and they're like, yo, we cannot put white people in slavery because how would we be able to distinguish white people that are slavery from those who are settlers over here? And then also, how would that work with the mentality? There was a lot of thought process that put in this. Then they were like, oh, Native Americans, we'll try that out. Oh, shoot, that doesn't work because these people are from this land and they have other tribes that are like, yeah, if you're doing it to that tribe, you'll do it to this tribe. So we're not going to allow that to happen. So we're going to start raiding your villages. Next best choice, black people from the continent of Africa, right? Snatch the people from their land, bring them here, don't speak the language, not support it. What warring tribe is going to come and a warring nation is going to come and rescue a black person from being in chattel slavery? And there's a difference between slaveries too. In chattel slavery here in America. That was the perfect option. So then the whole BS thing of black people sold black people into slavery too. Sure, they did, but let's develop that and go more truthfully into that. There are studies that show that people along the Ivory Coast that participated in putting other black people in slavery thought that it would be similar to the slavery that was there on the continent of Africa. Came out of their mouth. If they would have known that the treatment would have been different here in America, they never would have agreed to that. Learn that information from reading the book. Also, I want to talk about exceptionalism. Yes, Frederick Douglass did well. Was he the only black man in slavery?
Exactly.
Was he the only black person in slavery?
Who ran away from it, mind you.
Who ran away from it? Because
Yes.
if it was all that okay, why did he run away from it,
Yes.
right? Was he ever victimized when he was in bondage and enslaved? Like, this is the whole thing that aggravates me, is that we use exceptionalism as a justification that everything could be okay. Oprah's a billionaire. Why can't everybody else be a billionaire? Right, it doesn't work that way. And also, if we talk critical race theory, or as I would like to say, true American history, we would be a lot better off. And we would discover things such as colorism, and on how, while you might be black, of a lighter shade of black, your experience is different than mine, who is properly melanated black.
Oh.
Right? I know. You gotta be conform. Right.
My dog, what you doing?
You had to slip that one in there.
Man.
Listen,
Okay, Wakanda Forever.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But that's just who I am. I'm true to form always.
That was good. That was good, though. That was good.
But it would teach things like colorism, and it would talk about how racism is woven into every single thing in America. Why do I talk about race all the time? Because it's applicable. Show me one thing that happened where race is not applicable. Even the fact of our first black president being Barack Hussein Obama, colorism and racism all played a part in order for us to have that first black president. But these are things that we don't want to talk about because the education system that our educators are a part of, even though they teach music and not history, have failed our students. So, as I'm closing, we have to recognize a political fear tactic when we use it. I work in politics. I'm a political consultant. That's what I do by trade. And when we tie in as as Annalise brought up, are the words that are tied to critical race theory, and this whole baiting and switching, this whole thing of using a kernel of truth and dipping that in some shit and thinking that it's actually a good thing. That's what the Republican Party has done. And they love to use the claim to fame of, well, Lincoln freed the slaves. Well, Lincoln was trash, too.
Lincoln didn't free the slaves.
So what?
Lincoln didn't free the slaves.
Okay, well, I'm just simply saying that's the claim that I hear from the GOP all the damn time. So Lincoln was trash as well, too, and had to do some work to not be so problematic. Even when he was assassinated, he was better than when he started, but he wasn't where he should have been. So, books, I'm going to wrap it up. All right. Books I suggest you read. Stolen Legacy.
Yes,
It talks about how math began, and we always love to say that math started in Europe. Yes, yeah. It started in Europe, but when you use math to determine on the fact of the type of math that was there was not enough time for that math to be created to come from Europe.
I see.
All right, okay. And the other book, I said it before, Stand from the Beginning, and read the book Cast. And
Cast is great.
And people
Cast is
love
great.
to poke the Bible, but use the scripture from the Bible. The truth will set you free.
Amen, Brother Hashim.
Okay.
Amen.
So I will just simply say this. Thank you. I could tell you worked in politics. I am going to take on board what you had to say in the interest of not starting a wider argument. I would love to come back next Wednesday night or something else and we could discuss this in a different forum. Thank you, and God bless.
I want to recommend a book as well. It's called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond.
Could you say that again?
Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. She's a Colorado academic. Amazing, transformed my teaching. Has anybody know about her? Zaretta? Amazing in approaching how children learn, because any child, like the color of your skin, your race has nothing to do with your ability to learn. And if we can train teachers to approach their classrooms in a culturally responsive way, I believe that we will transform our public education system. We can start at the 1960s and see the trend, the negative trend in our community, the single parent rate. We can also take a look at the rate at which we abort our babies in our community at a larger rate than other communities. There are larger societal things that we can talk about that impact our community. But for the sake of unity, because I came tonight in hopes that I would personally leave with 2 or 3 things that I could do as action steps as a public educator to make a positive impact. I'm really nervous because it's after 8 and we just talked about history, and we postured tonight about how much history we knew. And that to me is an ineffective use of my time. I want to hear from this audience, what do you expect from us? What can all of us do, and what can you do? What do you expect for us to do to make a positive impact for our children? This gentleman has his hand.
I see the young man in the back.
Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond.
We actually have till 8:30, so if you want to drop these questions and action steps, we love that. Go ahead, bro.
What's going on? Hey, y'all can ask my name afterwards, so we can just get right into this. I ain't got no questions. I just got a lot of points from just the conversation tonight. So firstly, you should be teaching kids this in like their junior or senior year of high school, because there's no reason that you can say like, there's no reason you can be saying we can't teach kids about these higher level education topics, but yet we got kids learning AP Lit, AP Bio, AP Lang, AP Psychology. I took an AP Psychology class my senior year and got college credit for it. So that's all I'm saying. Secondly, history's definition is boiled down to his story. So you can't really take away these feelings of victims and victors. Instead, what y'all should be doing is helping these kids understand and go through their feelings and understand what all these topics really mean, what all these topics talk about. 3, in order to create change, especially as you see with the opposition, we as a people need to unify and create our own cultural rules and norms that we as a community follow and look at. 4, y'all literally have the critical race theory definition on the stage. So instead of talking about all these other definitions that all these other people have, just enforce that definition more and make that, the more standardized definition. 5, in the piece of history, you need to talk about black history, white history, Latinx history, and discuss how they all culminate with each other. Not just being like, oh, we just need to teach history. Nah, there's a lot of different forms of history. Like, you can't just say, let's teach history. Whose history? What do you mean by that? Let's see. 6, at the end of the day, the only way we're going to be more unified is talking and discussing about race, because our society literally revolves around that. We literally have this whole country had a group of people that literally got killed to the point of genocide because of race and because of the acclamation of resources. 7, what is proper history? How can you say that we need to teach proper history, but we don't even have a definition of like what that is or what that could be? 8, even though you can use Frederick Douglass as an example of not being a victim, you also have to understand the importance of opportunities and advantages. Yes, Frederick Douglass did do a lot of successful things in his life. And he also had a lot of opportunities that probably most of the black community in America and in South and Central America, because we also have to realize that there was more black slaves taken down to the South and Central America than there was in the U.S. So you got to think about opportunity. You got to think about advantages. 9, you got to start black history at the destruction of black history from 1500 BC to, from 1300 BC to 1500 AD by Chancellor H. Williams. I would advise that book. That's a really good book. Everything that we kind of talking about in that book. 10, so when can we step away from this victim ideal and just say oppress and oppressors? Because we keep going through this of like victims, victimization. No, just play it what it is. Oppress and oppression. That's all it is. Literally 11. So when will y'all give the students the chance to understand the world that they live in? Because y'all really like to like pretty up education in this like, hey, we're going to do it like this and say it like this so nobody gets hurt. This ain't a pretty world at all. This American history is not a pretty world at all. Give the kids the truth. Stop sugarcoating shit. 12, this is a good one. So about that leftist group that people were talking about, I'm getting right to it. So fuck that group, fuck the opposition, and just move them out of the way. Like, y'all want to keep asking and seeing how can we do this, how can we do that? No, move them out of your way. It's simple. All the time, like, we want to go, especially with the community, about this whole kumbaya effect, like, we can all be happy and we can all be together. Nah, you're going to have some people that's going to be able to learn. You're going to have some people that's not going to be able to learn. I learned that in my own educational experience at Colorado State University. 13, show the kids everything. Stop trying to make it all peachy cream with a bow on it. The world's not like that. Half of the problem with the kids today, especially within education, is the fact that they leave through education feeling like we didn't learn shit about the world and we didn't understand shit about how the world really works. Stop sugarcoating it. Tell the kids the truth. 14. So, especially on that topic about like how all of our leaders have been getting killed, all of our, Fred Hamptons, MLKs, Malcolm X. Well, the thing that y'all gotta understand is that if we want, that leadership to keep being possible, y'all gotta protect your leaders. The issue that like we love to forget is that in the Black Panther Party and the Civil Rights Movement and all these movements, you had the whole government literally sending spies into these movements to destroy them within. So if y'all want these leaders to be protected and you want these leaders to be safe and you want these organizations to be safe, secure your fucking ranks. Stop just letting everybody come in that shit. Let's see, 15.
Yeah, bro.
I got like 2 more.
You have a manifesto. That's basically.
I've been working on it.
Yeah. We're gonna have room for one more question. Yeah.
If there's any other question, I can end it right there. Cause
it's
yeah. Okay. I can end it right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody was talking about solutions, like what can we start to do, like as far as, and yes, I do agree that there's different truths with different agendas, so we need to start looking beyond the truth into the truths and where they lead, I believe, and I think that's only going to come about through different think tanks. Like there has to be maybe some grassroots committees around these things and what is a truth that won't get us a particular outcome. I want to know from the panelists up there, since we're wrapping it up and we're looking at, what can we do? Do you guys think that different committees representing different outcomes could have some sort of benefit, since there's not just one truth? And we know that the Denver Public School, not just Denver Public School System, but just school in general, is marketing for something. It's like what you're going to buy, what you're supposed to do when you get out of there, what classes, what jobs you're going to take, all these different things. So that's my question to you guys. Do you think committees would be an answer to interweaving, as the brother said, interweaving these different truths to get a more complete history instead of fighting about not having one or removing one permanently?
No, I agree, because if all we do is say this is your history, but we don't replace that with something in the now and in the future, something positive, and to your point, like not sugarcoating it, right? But we do have to speak life into our children. We have to give them confidence. We have to give them hope. We have to teach them skills and character traits. We're not doing enough work around character traits like integrity and caring, and what do those look like, and practicing those skills. And when someone new comes into your classroom and they look different from you, or they're from a different country, how do you interact with them? Like, what kind of food do you love to eat? What holidays do you celebrate? Where do you worship? Like, these are like questions that we don't really, some of us do these as adults, but we don't really do a good job of modeling that relationship building with children. And I think if that was something that we incorporated into the day, we could start to build a more humane society where, because the problem when it comes to racism or bigotry or xenophobia, it's because it's fear, and it's because we don't have interactions with people who are different from us,
And
right?
My one objection is objective truth does exist. There are not 8, 10, 2, 4, 37 truths. There is the truth. And do I believe that committees, subcommittees, groups, or whatever would be beneficial in determining those and working towards that? Yes, I do. But I do not believe in multiple truths, because that makes it in and of itself not true.
I believe in multiple truths, I do. But I think it's nuanced, and I appreciate your perspective. I think it's nuanced. I won't
Watch your mic.
But I'll say this:
They can't
God,
hear you. Just speak into
the
it.
love of God. Okay, I believe this. If I, as a teacher, this happens. If I teach the story of the transatlantic slave trade, and I keep it brief, right? There was a boat ride. It was long as hell. They're in the belly of the ship, and they got out. They were dispersed in the Americas. They worked free labor. You know what I mean? Their skill sets were exploited for the benefit of, to grow a country. That's the data, right? Okay, so I can tell you that story as I just did. And if you are a student who belongs to a community directly impacted by that history, you might come away feeling like history's bad luck accident or something. You might come away feeling like a conquered person, right? Because it's so dismal and bleak. Maybe that's some of the pushback around critical race theory on the conservative end, is that, like, I'm really not interested in emphasizing for my children, like, the moments in history in which they were broken and bleeding. And that's fine. I could hear that, but I could tell you that same story, and the language that I curate is going to suggest to that child that they come from somebody supernatural and impossible, because they did in fact lay down in the dark for 30 days with waste under them, and they made the seismic choice to stay when so many other people didn't. Now, I just taught you the same history, but in one version of it, you're conquered. In the other one, just purely based on the language I curate, you're a hero. You're amazing. So I just say that
exactly.
to say,
No,
yeah.
100% what I'm saying, because I think where we're seeing a lot of the pushback and the misunderstanding, because as a public school educator, a black woman and a Republican, I can see crystal clear where the misunderstanding is. And so that's why it's so important to have these conversations, because you're right. Whereas the rhetoric is like, oh, well, white Republicans are all racist and they don't want to talk about history. That's not true. It's a lie, in fact. But where the truth is, you have to not just give it to them. You said it 100% the way I'm thinking it. You have to give kids something more than just this victim, oppressed, depressed, this is the history, and leave it there. You have to take kids past that so that we can start to change our America, because we're all like, we have a bad history, but we've come a long way. Why aren't we celebrating that? We have so much to celebrate.
I think, okay, so just to your point, so then how do we curate language that, let's be honest, doesn't make white people feel like the scum of the earth after they hear it? Because that's where the pushback is really coming from. The tears, the anger, the explosive fragility is part of what we always see when we start to make advancements. And I'm not asking that as like, really, how do we make white people feel better about being the descendants of people who whip people? But if we're going to use that strategy, that also must be addressed. And I don't know how to do that other than saying that teaching the truth about American history is an invitation to current and future generations of white people to make a Rocky story out of this and come back and be the first generation to finally get it damn right. And you can't do that unless you face it. And if we can't get past the violent fragility that often results in bullets and lynch ropes, manifesting itself as the violence and fragility we see today, then we can't have that conversation. So we must push back against the pushback against critical race theory. And whatever that looks like, and dissect it and figure the nuance and figure out what it actually means to teach the truth in American history. Because as I remember a conservative telling me, facts don't care about my feelings. And I want them to apply this logic to how they feel about black history and indigenous history being taught in earnest, and see if you can figure out a way, if we can figure out a way to create a narrative that says this happened and now I invite you to transcend and transform this.
But that template exists. It does. It exists. And I mean, as an example, Germany is an example. They make sure they own every second of what they did. It's on the buildings, it's on the doors, it's
in
etched
the
in
law.
the stones, right? I mean, they force you to confront it.
They pay
everywhere.
reparations.
And so no one's lecturing, no one's browbeating, but it's like they have decided that their way of dealing with that is to absolutely honor memory.
Instead of the Nazi flag is not racist,
Right.
it's heritage.
Right.
Let me just say, if you're a patriotic American and you want to maintain your sense of pride in this country, let me help you out. White supremacy, systemic racism is a global phenomenon. The United States, America, you are not alone in your propagation, your continuation of systemic racism. You're not alone, so you don't have to feel special in that way, okay? I know this is a thing called American exceptionalism, but you are not exceptional in that way, okay? Also, let me explain my positionality here. I'm actually a black immigrant, okay? I was born in Canada, okay? Being called a nigger did not happen for me first here in the United States. Happened in Canada, okay? I went to predominantly white schools where you can count on two hands how many black people went to the school, okay? I didn't learn about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, civil rights, till I came to the United States at 11 years old. I didn't learn about any of that stuff, okay? But I knew what racism was. I didn't know what the word racism was intellectually. Couldn't intellectualize it as a child, but I knew the experience. So I say all of that to say, let me do a little promo here. At MSU Denver, we have something called the Africana Studies Department, okay? It studies white supremacy, racism as a global phenomenon. We have an African specialist. We have a historian that deals with the Caribbean. I'm the resident sociologist, but I also focus on the black experience in the United States. This fall, I'll be teaching a hip hop class, a politics and black people class. I also teach a social movements class, focusing on the United States experience. So, you know, to this notion of, you know, protecting people's feelings and minding people's sense of patriotism and that sort of thing, I don't really buy into that. I think that's about colonialism and imperialism, and, you know, maintaining a sense of identity that is tied to something that has to do with the flag and that sort of, but it's all problematic in my mind. And that is where critical social theory, as scholars will use that term, is important, right? It's not taking status quo power dynamics in society for granted, but taking a critical eye towards society as it is presently configured, uncovering the historical dynamics that led to present day circumstances, right? Not taking power status quo as what must be, but appreciating
Coming up on time.
protest dynamics, people pushing against power can create a new possibility in society. So that's where critical race theory is rooted in, despite what folks may say about communism and Marxism and so on and so forth.
So we do have two more questions. I don't. We could talk about certain things forever. I want y'all 2 words really quick. Empathy should be taught to everybody, and more teachers of color in all schools, not just black and brown schools, but especially in white schools, so they can kind of learn that diverse perspective. And we have a question here, and then Annalise, I think you said you had a question.
Yeah. Okay.
We got 7 minutes.
Let's try to keep these pretty quick.
Yeah. We there? All right. So yeah, I'll keep mine very short. My name is Vonzel Sawyer. The kids call me Almighty Understanding. I'm sorry, brother. I know you can't see me. I'm kind of dark. I'm behind the yeah.
It's the light.
Yeah.
It's the lights.
But I'm here representing Culture Brigade. We're a nonprofit. We create free events for children and their families. We also do a lot of work on the East Corridor of Colfax with a lot of partners and grants and the East Collaborative and all that cool stuff. So to go on, I think I don't really have a question for you guys, but I fear that a lot of people want this critical race theory in schools and adolescent schools that are younger than college students, because that's just one of the, it's like a cry for help, but it's not, that's not even critically thought out. I completely disagree with having CRT in elementary schools, middle schools, or high schools. I think it should stay a college thing. And the main reason why that is because when you're dealing with anybody under the age of 18, there are certain ways that people grow. And just like there were adverse things that happened when melanated people were brought over here from West Africa and things of that nature, there are adverse things that happen to children all the way from the womb. And you have to be very careful about how you teach, how you approach, and how you gain the trust of children in the first place. And so I think that people are just looking at it a little bit just wrong, where you want critical race theory, something that's a college level thing, to be taught to very young children, where maybe it should be something that's broken down. I'm sorry?
We addressed that earlier. That's not what we're advocating.
I'm not saying that's what we're advocating at all. So check what I'm going here. So what I'm saying is this, from what I've got. So I'm not a teacher or anything. That's why I represented what I'm doing here and all that good stuff. I saw this on Facebook and I wanted to come. I think it's a very important topic. And so from what I'm gathering, critical race theory is a college stage course for college kids, correct? Am I wrong?
Not even.
No.
It started in legal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Graduate level. Yeah.
Okay, graduate level legal.
This is not in K through 12.
Okay.
It's not.
And nobody.
Right, and so, and there's from my understanding on the news and things of that nature, there's a push to have that in high school, middle school, and elementary. Am I correct?
No.
So the push is necessary. The push is. There's a lot of confusion, and some of that is on purpose, as you stated, with the propaganda.
Right.
Coming back to that, I think the issue is just teaching how this bias and racism is showing itself. Because as a teacher myself, seeing kids every day, they dealt with a lot of stuff, and a lot of that stuff is coming from places of bias and racism and those experiences. Like when Donald Trump started sending folks, like I had people stop coming to school. Like we had to stop school for like 2 days and have some serious conversations and meet with teachers and teach them how not to talk to any ICE people. So I think it's more of the conversations around racism and how we can teach kids. And if we are going to dive into things like serving two masters, integration ideals, and client interests in school desegregation litigation. like that's college level stuff right there for sure. But how that stuff personifies itself in our schools is going to be important for us to learn. And I'm going to pass this mic over here, and then we're going to come to Ms.
Yeah, I actually do have a quick question. I'm actually going to give up the mic. So with all that being said, because I'm not as viewed in it as you all are, but at the same time, from my understanding, they want in the schools the backlash from the Caucasian community is like, hey, we don't want that in there. Everybody's like, hey, our children need to know the truth. And all I'm saying is that I think it needs to be broken down to a smaller level, because we're talking about books and things that people should read. Not once have I heard anybody talk about quiet weapons for hidden wars. Not once. That's a full-blown document that every American needs to read, not just melanated or Caucasian or whatever it may be. Schools are an institution. Institutions are set up a certain way. So I don't, like the sister was saying, I don't expect why everybody wants something to change when that's not the case. We're behind enemy lines here at the end of the day. But
so I think where some of the confusion is coming, there's some intersectionality, because there are critical race theorists who write books, and a lot of those books are being read in the teacher ranks as professional development, and because there's no curriculum for critical race theory, right? There's no curriculum for culturally responsive education or diversity, equity, inclusion training. Everybody who wants to go out there and teach diversity and equity will do it from their own lens. They make their own slides. They insert their own vocabulary, and it's different from every single school, whoever's being trained. So where there's this confusion is that some of these school districts are hiring people who are using language from other critical race theorists because they are writing books. Does that make sense? There's confusion. That's why we keep, and it's not on purpose all the time. That's a lie. There is confusion and there is misunderstanding, but there is some leakage from critical race theorists into the public schools. So we need to be careful how we're judging people in the language that we're using in the blame game, because if we're going to be really objective and fair in how we're discoursing about this, and using tone to make, and it's not just white parents, you guys. Like, you can go on the internet and see black parents and Asian parents. There are people who are taking issue with what we were talking about, how we're educating our children past the history. And we do have patriots, and we do have people who love this country, and that's okay. We love this country. We believe in the future. We believe in the Constitution. This is stuff. People want to make fun of Frederick Douglass, but he talked all about the Constitution. Okay, so this is I'm just pushing back a little bit, because again, I came to look for solutions. I'm desperate to leave here and say my time here was valuable, your time here was valuable, and not to posture about trying to poke fun at the Democrats or the Republicans, or use rhetoric. Like, come on, guys, like, give me something.
I'm an independent. So,
okay,
yeah.
but yes,
I would.
yes, I would, because that was very clear.
Let's
Frederick Douglass also wrote, "What to the slave is the 4th of July."
Yeah. And then we got to make sure we maintaining some semblance of order.
I teach it in
I
school.
appreciate y'all. Devon and Priscilla,
Sir.
we got a minimum amount of time, and we still got 2 people to speak. So I appreciate y'all.
I don't know how long y'all can stay, but I want to respect the time of Cleo Parker Robinson's. You would have to probably be the last one officially, and then unofficially, if we can go over. Sir.
Go ahead.
You ready? All this brain power up here, what's the solution to this whole mess? What's the solution?
What's the mess that you're referring to?
Well, let me let me explain myself. I've been here. I've been listening to everyone, right? Okay, but I still don't hear the solution. How do we fix? How do we come together? That's what I came here for, to listen. That's what I want to know.
I think expecting a singular solution is the wrong thing to expect, number one. I would also say expecting us to unite around a singular understanding of, quote, the problem, I would say is also, so there's a place for a variety of perspectives and heated argument. Out of heated argument, beautiful ideas can emerge.
I'm so tired of hearing about 1619 and all back in the day, because we weren't even a country till what, 1776? I'm not even interested in this.
I would respectfully disagree. I enjoy hearing about 1619.
I want to...
Brother, I need you to focus on one question. Do you want a solution?
Yes, I want a solution.
So...
to this whole racism.
I think
the division of America. The division of America.
Solution.
I want a solution to that.
I have an answer, but
solution.
I want to hear.
One person, I think he's going to give you a response, and then we can
can we
move
go
on.
Give our answers to his question?
All right.
Yeah. So really quick. So Leandre and I think Devon wanted to speak, and I think that's everybody on the panel. And then if we have time, we'll go from there. Is that okay? Theo.
Yeah.
And then Cleo Parker, just depends on if it thumbs up, if we got a few more minutes. But go ahead, Leandre.
The solution is unity around several different bands. Our problem is that, I said earlier, we've never entered into America. We talk about this patriotism. I'm one of those people. I will not sit by and laugh and let everybody else enjoy the fruits of liberty that are written down in this country, that our ancestors bled for, that they died for, that we still struggle for. I am not going to let that go unanswered. Those are our God-given rights, and we must take hold of them. The way we do that is by controlling our economic destiny, coming together, banding our monies together, supporting our schools, supporting our businesses, and building from within. Truly, the American dream on a community level instead of just the individual.
So
I believe that's
true
where the
freedom
solution
is
starts.
economic freedom. That's what I believe.
Absolutely.
And then we're going to come over to Devon. And
I would say take the example of the founders. If systemic racism is about domination historically and exploitation and unequal power dynamics, just take the example of the founders. How did they address their feeling of being oppressed? How did they address the feeling of being disenfranchised, being denied power, being denied full inclusion into the body politic as it was under the British Crown? How did they do that?
Hey, it's a lot of hate. It's a lot of hate going on right now in America.
I don't think this is hate. I think that's beautiful. I think what the founders did was awesomely beautiful. However, what was tragically unfortunate was they didn't apply their ideology to the slaves that they held.
And guess what?
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with dialogue. When we talk about we want a solution and we want to have something tangible to walk away with, that ain't how the Constitution was written. It wasn't sat down and written in 2 hours in one day.
11 years.
No, y'all. The fact is that this has never been done when it comes to this subject right here. Nowhere have you seen it. If you can look for it across the internet, if you will, have conservatives and liberals sat down and tried to have a constructive conversation about what was happening in this country that was dividing us and kept our heads about us and kept our wits and kept our civility so that we could disagree agreeably. And so when we're doing this, don't set your expectations too high. We took a first step today. We realized and proved that we could have this conversation without needing security and without people knocking each other upside the head and figuring out what to do. And I'm about to bring my gun, right? So therefore, this is groundbreaking. And we did it with an all-black panel.
Nobody flipped over a table.
Nobody flipped over a table, which means that we have on film precedent that this dialogue is possible, and we may not reach a solution for the very first day. But I guarantee you, you're around somebody who you don't know, who is from a different aspect of the political spectrum, and you can get to know because these dialogues breed and weave together communities. So at the very least, in a controversial time, in a controversial subject, we were able to figure out how to keep our heads about us and make a new friend, hopefully.
I think it's very important for us to remember also that not only must we have the conversation, but we must also be willing to step out and do the work. Like it doesn't end with the conversation. We have to have people out here putting in the work. We have to have people invested in educating our children, maybe not as teachers, because who wants to be a teacher besides me and a few of us, but honestly, being present in these schools is going to be important so that we can make sure that our kids are getting the truth. And sometimes our teachers are not able to do it all alone because they need the community. And we also must join together to amplify our voice in places where decisions are being made. And that's the only way that those changes can happen. And Theo, do we want to let Annalise get her question in?
Annalise, if you want to just end us out real quick.
Sure. We are looking for solutions to a mysterious problem. The problem is there are a number of states that are passing legislation that is banning certain conversations in schools.
Yes.
Here's what it says. It bans the teaching of critical race theory, which legislation describes as, quote, the theory that racism is not merely the product of prejudice, but that racism is embedded in American society and its legal systems in order to uphold the supremacy of white persons. That's what they're banning in multiple states, including Florida and Georgia. My question is, and I would like each of the panelists, if you're willing, This is the problem. States are coming, there's entities in every state working to create legislation very similarly. Mostly Republicans, right? Would each of you care to share, if that legislation comes forth, where are you on upholding that legislation or fighting against it?
And then we can wrap it up like that. Go ahead.
So this is something I posted on Facebook regarding.
That was very clear, and Annalise, that was actually really, really good. Thank you very much for that.
Regarding your
Yep.
specific question, this is something I posted on Facebook. The anti-critical race theory, in quotation marks, hysteria, is essentially a movement in defense of American racism, and is a backlash to the anti-racist movement which gained popularity during the 2020 BLM protests after the murder of George Floyd. If anti-racist people, which I identify as, are not vigilant and attentive to countering this anti-CRT hysteria, local school districts across the nation will become plagued with anti-intellectualism, authoritarianism, and MAGA-style white supremacist ideology. I moved here in summer 2018. I left Florida, all right, under Governor DeSantis. Great example of a move towards authoritarianism. And, you know, and it's interesting, the GOP styles itself as defenders of liberty. And that is the exact opposite of that, right? I mean, it really irritates me hearing that, yeah.
We know, but can you say it? Are you going to stand if legislation, which is coming, I'm telling you.
Here, you think here in the state of Colorado?
It's not a thing.
Okay.
There's school districts that stay till 4 o'clock in the morning.
Cherry Creek.
They're Jeffco. They're talking about it now. So where are you on standing up against legislation banning simply what it is saying?
I think an answer just simply like I would fight against it, or I would not fight against it. That way we can kind of get through this.
Yeah. Making sure.
I think we know where Devon stands.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I do on a daily basis. I mean.
So I will fight against it.
Yes. Or else why be an educator? You know?
You have to know the language.
Or even.
Let's just go right down the line.
Yeah,
so,
Dominique.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not marching down the road, if that's what you're asking me. I'm not picketing, I'm not protesting,
Say it into your mic.
I'm not doing any of that. I'm going to be in the tradition of my grandmother, which is to say, I'm gonna be black and amazing the whole time. I'm gonna make sure everybody around me knows how amazing they are, how brilliant they are. If they need support, I got them. I'm going to also be in the tradition of my grandmother that the kitchen table is just as good a classroom as any other classroom. That is what I'm going to do. But I guess I do not have the same fervor around this latest, the latest shenanigans from folks in power. It doesn't surprise me. But I have to spend some more time, sis, with your question. I need to interrogate if I'm mad, why I'm mad, who I'm mad at, and if I'm going to fight, what weapons I would use or what my battle strategy would be. I don't feel comfortable trying to spitball that right now. Yeah, but I appreciate the question.
I think that's the reality.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm asking, because it will require everyone to consider where they're at in this and what they're willing to do. But I just want to know who I'm going to roll up next to.
Sims, go ahead, bro.
So I've considered this a long time ago, even before this all started, and I made the decision to continue to do the work, continue to work to improve those that I care about and that I love, and that's my community. And if whatever legislative decision comes down, I'm going to continue to do what I do, because I don't even think the people who are making the legislation truly understand what they're legislating.
Let's go.
Once again, I think there is a lot of misunderstanding in where all the way down to the classroom level. Like, this is the truth. When I tell people what I'm told in professional development, they cannot believe what I'm hearing, what children are hearing down at the classroom level, because even people at central office don't know, people on the school board don't know. They just don't know what's coming all the way down to the classroom level. And I've had conversations with executives in my school district about, this is what I was told, this is what is being taught. They have no idea. So, like, The left hand is not talking to the right hand. Well, so what I'm trying to answer. I'm trying to answer your question in a factual way, and to help you understand that it's not cut and dry. That I am, even in this conversation tonight, I'm hearing just terms, but no real understanding of what's being said and what's being taught in the classroom. So my approach is very similar to Dedrick's. It's that there is a healthy way of teaching about history. There is a healthy way of talking to our kids of color, and I think that's the most important thing. I would have to read the legislation in order to say, because I'm not happy with how it was rolled out this past year at my school. I was not happy, and I've had conversations.
What?
So
What was rolled out? I'm sorry.
How diversity and equity was being rolled out. Some of the professional development and some of the things that were told, I feel like were garbage. Okay, so I would push back on that. I have pushed back on that. That's how I would push back. If I see something that is damaging as a teacher, that I think that is indoctrination, I will push back on that every single time. I don't know if you want to roll up on that or not, but if you feel like something is damaging to your babies, wouldn't you push back on it too? If you described a very healthy way that you talked about hair with your girls, right? A very caring way. You had people of all different ages in a very loving, controlled way. That is the right way to do it, right? There's a wrong way to do it as well. We've talked about that. There's a right and wrong way to do it. So I can't make a general, like, I would be opposed to something if I can't see the language. I mean, I'm a very black and white kind of person, right? You know, so I think you've, in a short amount of time.
They're banning those conversations from happening in classrooms. That's very clear. It's not confusing. It is.
I think there is confusion because you guys don't hear what's being told in the classroom
I'm referring to the legislation that has passed and the educators who are currently fighting against it in Georgia. There are multiple efforts to fight against that ban that has been enacted because the ban would actually criminalize all the way through college level for teaching critical race theory and etc., which I referenced, was the statement was that there was racism embedded in the American system.
So real quick, I think like even the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, who's a black man, has put together a task force to study because he was hearing reports from educators as well of concerns. I think that's probably a good first step. If states are hearing concerns from parents about how things are being taught, then it warrants a discussion and some research. I think that's a fair way to start rather than blanketing everything, into one narrative because it's way more nuanced than that.
All right. Oh, sorry.
Cut and dry, I'd have to read the bill. Generally, I am against any government limiting free speech. At the state level, at the federal level, I am a believer in what's in the 9th and 10th Amendments. And those things that leave those rights that are actually enumerated to us of free speech, and those things that aren't enumerated, we still retain. So I am against states banning language, banning discussion. School boards are a little bit different. That's the parents' purview of that school board.
But it would be guided by the
state.
Yeah,
but that's me. State and federal, I don't believe it's their purview.
Which is where the legislation
I would be against that.
Okay.
But in the school board, that's their business.
Right. And the legislation comes down in Colorado, I'm gonna fight like hell to make sure that people can teach critical race theory. Why am I going to fight like that? Because if you ban critical race theory, you don't get to improve it. If diversity, equity, and inclusion is willy-nilly, and some people are teaching this and some people are teaching that, some of that's toxic, some of that's healthy, but we can't talk about it all, you don't get to uniform it and fix it. So if that legislation comes down and is absolutely fascist, which is why you would be against legislation that limits free speech, especially when it comes to teaching the truth about our ancestors. And if we can figure out a way to healthfully do that, assign a committee, do exactly what we did today, look at everything that's being taught, some conservatives, some progressives, and y'all work out something uniform, but you don't shut down the discussion with legislation.
Yeah.
It leads to enabling the massive white denial that has stopped our history from being taught correctly in the first place, and I won't stand for it.
Thank you, Theo. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I appreciate everybody coming out today. It's important to remember that math has also become standardized and called Common Core, and those results are pretty terrible as well. So it's important to not only be unafraid to engage in a dialogue, but also be unafraid to learn while you go, and make sure that you're changing as you make mistakes. You don't make the same mistake twice, otherwise that's insanity. Continue to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So thank you guys for coming out. We are Shop Talk Live.
We do
Theo.
this. Make a friend. Talk to somebody you didn't agree with.
Yeah.
This is how we build community.
STL Colorado. I'm Gene Fashaw. Theo Wilson, thank you for everybody that came to the panel. Thank you for all for engaging in dialogue. I wish we could do some more. Next time, maybe we can have it a little bit closer to each other so we can really get talking. And you guys have a safe trip. Make sure you meet somebody new today, exchange some information, and you guys have a safe trip home.
All right,
Is this where we do what Jesus did? Flip the table?
Yeah, just take that tape and flip it.
All right, now, who's going to flip the table?
Sorry, brother. Let's put these on mute. Where is that?
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Yeah. Behind the table, some.